Her name was Clara Sinclair. She was 32 years old, the daughter her family coldly introduced as someone who merely corrected technical documents for small projects. No one inside the Sinclair mansion knew that 2 weeks earlier, Clara had discovered a flaw powerful enough to turn their building into a trap made of steel and concrete. That evening, crystal light spilled across the long dining table as shareholders raised their glasses to Julian Sinclair. He had just helped the family corporation secure the contract to build the largest high-tech convention center in Massachusetts. Richard spoke of Julian as the perfect successor. Evelyn mentioned her son's new sports car and Harborview apartment with undisguised pride. Clara sat near the far end of the table, an almost untouched plate in front of her. When someone asked what she did for work, Evelyn answered for her. She said Clara merely assisted with administrative drawings, preferred a quiet life, and lacked the ambition required for major projects. Julian did not look at his sister. In his mind, Clara's silence only made his own success shine more brightly. But Clara could not forget the afternoon 2 weeks earlier when she had seen the final construction drawings on her father's desk. Within minutes, she realized that the western ventilation system was connected to the underground pressure release line through a pipe neck that was far too narrow. If the 2 secondary valves were locked, the pressure would be forced back into the central area. Smoke or toxic gas could spread through the guest section before emergency crews had time to respond. Clara took the drawings to Richard's office and pointed out the dangerous junction. She demanded that the exhaust pipe diameter be increased and that the reinforcement around the pressure chamber be inspected. Julian burst out laughing. He asked whether she had mistaken the convention center plans for those of a public restroom. Richard did not laugh, but the disappointment in his eyes was even colder. He said the system had been inspected by a Swiss security company and that Clara should respect people with real-world experience. Neither of them knew that the company had evaluated only the control software. They knew even less about the fact that Julian's assistant had accepted money from a subcontractor to replace the pressure-resistant alloy with cheaper steel. Forged signatures had been hidden among hundreds of pages of inspection records. The discrepancy was small enough for an ordinary person to overlook. But Clara had never been an ordinary architect. That night, she reconstructed the ventilation network on a computer system that was not connected to any civilian network. The warning model appeared as a red band running straight through the area reserved for honored guests. Clara sat motionless for a long time, not because she was afraid she might be wrong, but because she knew she was right. In the hands of someone with malicious intent, that vulnerability could become a weapon. Back at the dinner table, Evelyn asked when Clara would finally find a job the family could be proud of. Clara lifted her eyes. Her face remained calm, but a decision had already taken shape inside her. She did not argue. She did not ask them to trust her. She simply looked at Julian and said the convention center was not safe. The laughter around the table stopped. Julian set down his glass and asked whether she intended to ruin the evening just to prove that she mattered. Before Clara could answer, the encrypted communication device inside her coat pocket vibrated exactly once. It was not a message from the office. It was a summons from a facility buried deep underground, a place where Clara was never addressed by her real name. There, she had a code name: Aegis. 2 hours after dinner, Clara left the Sinclair mansion in the gray sedan her mother had always criticized for being dull. Julian had forgotten her warning about the ventilation system the moment she walked out the door. But Clara did not drive toward downtown Boston. She headed into the suburbs, then turned onto a dead-end road hidden behind a forest of pine trees. At the end of the road stood nothing but an old maintenance station. Clara placed her hand on a biometric scanner concealed behind a high-voltage warning sign. Blue light swept across her pupils. A door opened into the earth. The elevator carried Clara down through multiple layers of concrete. When the doors opened, the exhaustion vanished from her face. Her back straightened. Her gaze became cold and precise. The security personnel turned toward her at once. No one called her Miss Sinclair. They called her Aegis. The National Infrastructure Defense Center stretched beneath the ground like a hidden city. Maps of power grids, tunnels, and ventilation systems inside federal facilities shifted constantly across the electronic walls. Clara was the chief systems architect responsible for the underground defenses of places that could never be allowed to fall. Her family believed she worked overtime for a few extra dollars. They had no idea that her decisions could determine whether a hospital continued operating during a crisis or whether a government building could be isolated before an attacker had time to act. Richard had once suggested that she become the bookkeeper at a private preschool because that job would be easier to explain to his friends. Those who protect national secrets must learn to remain silent, even in the face of the most personal insults. But that night, silence was no longer an option. A red alert flooded the main screen. An intrusion team was attacking the underground electrical system beneath the federal diplomatic complex. They were generating false signals, forcing the system to open a backup channel, then slipping through the very layer of protection designed to save lives. The veteran engineers argued fiercely. One wanted to cut all power. Another proposed sealing the technical tunnels. But every option could leave hundreds of people trapped. Director Vance entered the control room and slammed his hand on the table. Everyone fell silent. He looked at Clara. "Aegis, what is your plan?" Clara studied the flow of data for several seconds. Then she ordered them to activate a simulated electrical grid that existed outside the official operating blueprint. Instead of blocking the attackers, she would show them a path that appeared to be unprotected. A reverse flow trap, the engineers objected. If the calculations were wrong, the false signals could spill into the real system. Clara did not raise her voice. She simply told them they had 3 minutes before the intruders seized the Eastern distribution station. The order was carried out. Lines of code raced across the screen. 1 minute, 2 minutes. The foreign signals poured into the simulated grid like water being pulled into an abyss. Clara sealed each access gate behind them, forcing the entire intrusion team to reveal its location. At the 3rd minute, the red screen turned green. The threat had been contained. There was no applause, no champagne. Vance simply nodded at Clara, a gesture that carried more weight than every word of praise her family had ever given Julian. Clara looked at the stabilized map, but in her mind she saw the narrow pipe inside the Sinclair Convention Center once again. Some vulnerabilities were nothing more than mistakes, and some were waiting for someone to turn them into a target. 3 days before the Sinclair Corporation's anniversary celebration, Clara saw a name on the guest list that silenced the entire analysis room: Deputy Secretary of Defense Nathan Cole. He would attend the convention center as the guest of honor, seated directly beneath the western ventilation section Clara had warned Julian to repair. Seconds later, the intelligence system issued a second alert. A sabotage group specializing in infiltrating civilian infrastructure had appeared in Boston. Clara stood before the screen, watching 2 layers of data overlap: the deputy secretary's travel route, her family's building plans, suspicious transactions between the subcontractor and an intermediary company that did not officially exist. Everything converged at the same point. The pipe was too narrow. The pressure chamber had not been reinforced. The western maintenance door could be opened with a construction crew access card. This was no longer a design flaw. It had become a plan. Vance suggested canceling the entire event. Clara shook her head. If the saboteurs learned that their target had been discovered, they would disappear, take the evidence with them, and choose another building. She wanted the celebration to proceed as planned, quietly seal off the access routes, then force them to step into the very trap they believed no one had noticed. No one in the Sinclair family was informed. Clara knew her father and Julian would oppose federal forces, intervening in a building they regarded as a symbol of honor. Worse, Julian might accidentally warn his assistant while trying to protect the corporation's reputation, so Clara did not call home. She sent her analysis file through Aegis's encrypted channel and requested the deployment of a rapid response team under Agent Carter. Carter had once been trapped inside a service tunnel during an operation in Washington. Clara had been the one who detected the toxic gas changing direction and opened an emergency escape route before the oxygen ran out. From that day forward, Carter never questioned her judgment. Clara's order was brief: "I will be present as a civilian. Do not let my family know. Activate the escort only when you receive the code Blackout." On the night of the celebration, the convention center glowed like a palace made of glass. Luxury cars pulled up one after another at the entrance. Shareholders, officials, and members of the media crossed the grand lobby, where Julian Sinclair's name appeared on a screen higher than that of any other architect. Julian wore a custom-tailored tuxedo and accepted handshakes as though the building were his unquestionable triumph. His assistant followed behind him, constantly checking his phone. He had no idea that every message he sent was being monitored by Carter's team. Clara arrived in a simple dark dress. Evelyn looked her daughter up and down, then frowned slightly. She said Clara could at least have made an effort to dress appropriately on her brother's important day. Clara did not answer. She spotted Carter near the wine station, disguised as a server. 2 other agents stood beside the service door. On the roof, a tactical helicopter sat with its lights off and its engine idling. Everything was ready. Dinner began beneath the soft sound of string music. Evelyn stood and spoke about the Sinclair family's 30 years of building its reputation. She praised Richard as the man who had laid the foundation, and Julian as the one who would lead the corporation into the future. Then she looked at Clara. Evelyn's smile remained gentle, but every word had been chosen to wound. She said Clara preferred a quiet life, handled anonymous paperwork, and had unfortunately failed to inherit her brother's sharp instincts. Several people laughed politely. Julian lowered his head to conceal a satisfied smile. Clara felt dozens of eyes turned toward her. She was used to being underestimated, but this time the humiliation was unfolding inside a building that could soon become the scene of a disaster. Evelyn continued, demanding that Clara stand, congratulate Julian, and apologize for her previous baseless warnings. At that exact moment, the device concealed beneath Carter's sleeve vibrated, once, then twice. The intruders had opened the western service door. Carter looked toward Clara. His expression did not change, but his hand moved close to his communication device. Clara raised her glass of water and studied Julian one final time. He was still waiting for her to bow her head. She set the glass down. Then she gave a slight nod. Blackout. The moment Clara nodded, every light inside the convention center went out. The music vanished. The screens along the walls turned black at once. In the darkness, glasses struck tabletops in rapid succession, mingling with the frightened cries of the guests. Less than 3 seconds later, the red emergency lights came on. Carter threw his serving cloth onto the floor. He moved straight toward the main table and pulled Julian out of the aisle, just as 2 armored agents emerged through the western door. Another team quickly surrounded Deputy Secretary Cole, raised protective shields, and escorted him toward the secure elevator. Evelyn shot to her feet and demanded that someone explain what was happening. She believed it was a technical failure humiliating the Sinclair family in front of the media, but Carter did not look at her. He stopped before Clara, came to attention, and gave her a formal military salute. Reporting, Commander Aegis. The Blackout protocol has been activated. The western ventilation zone has been sealed. 2 suspects have been detained inside the service tunnel. The helicopter is waiting for you on the roof. No one moved. The glass slipped from Julian's hand and shattered across the floor, scattering bright fragments beneath the red lights. He looked at Carter, then at Clara, as though his sister's familiar face had been replaced by that of a complete stranger. Richard tried to speak, but his throat had gone dry. He had spent his entire life judging people by titles, contracts, and elegant parties. Now, armed agents were waiting for orders from the daughter he had once advised to find a simple job so she would stop embarrassing the family. Clara rose. She did not hurry. She was not angry. She took no pleasure in the shock spreading through the room. She simply adjusted her collar, removed the communication device from her pocket, and asked Carter about the condition of the pressure chamber. Carter reported that the saboteurs had placed a gas dispersal device inside the western conduit. If the system had remained active for a few more minutes, the entire honored guest section would have been contaminated. Evelyn covered her mouth with one hand. Julian kept shaking his head. He said it was impossible because the building had passed every inspection. But at that moment, 2 agents escorted his assistant through the lobby. The assistant's face was pale. Inside his pocket, they had found the technical access card and a copy of the ventilation system plans. There was nowhere left for the truth to hide. Julian turned toward Clara. The arrogance had vanished from his eyes, leaving only the fear of a man who had just realized that the warning he once mocked had saved his life. Clara studied him for a long moment. The next time someone points out a flaw in your design, listen before you defend your pride. And remember to increase the exhaust pipe diameter by 15%. That miscalculation nearly killed everyone here. She turned away and left with Carter. No one dared to stop her. Months later, Clara received the National Medal of Creation in a private ceremony. There were no reporters, no grand speeches, only people who understood that a city was sometimes protected by minds whose faces never appeared on billboards. When Clara returned to her office, she found a letter waiting on her desk. Evelyn had written it by hand. She apologized. She said Richard no longer entered his old office. Julian had stepped down from his executive position and was cooperating with investigators. At the end of the letter, she begged Clara to come home for dinner, just once. Clara read every line to the end. For a moment, she remembered all the years she had spent sitting at the far end of the table, waiting for recognition that never came. Then she understood that they were not truly sorry they had failed to love her. They were sorry they had misjudged her power. Clara folded the letter and dropped it into the trash. She did not need to return to a place that valued people only after seeing their titles. The Sinclair family had built buildings that carried its name. Clara had built a legacy no one could ever take from her. Sometimes, the people closest to us only recognize our worth after the rest of the world does. Clara never needed revenge because her strength, discipline, and quiet determination revealed the truth for her. What would you have done in her place? Would you have forgiven the Sinclair family or walked away for good? Share your opinion in the comments because we would love to hear your perspective. If this story moved you, please give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story of betrayal, hidden strength, and well-deserved justice.